The National Desk, America's News Now.
We've been working to make sure that our nationals and other foreign nationals can get out. And over the last 2 days, you've seen Americans and their families begin to come out of Gaza.
More Americans are safely out of harm's way as hundreds remain waiting to leave war-torn Gaza. New York Mayor Eric Adams abruptly returned to New York without meeting with Washington officials concerning New York's migrant problems, the possible reason for the change of plans, and then the alarming new data detailing the number of middle and high school students still hooked on tobacco. This is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Amira David. As we come on the air tonight, the House of Representatives just moments ago passed a $14.3 billion aid package for Israel. The proposed bill suggested cutting funding for the IRS to get the funds. This morning, new House Speaker Mike Johnson explained why House majority went in that direction.
I did not attach that for political purposes, okay? I attached it because, again, we're trying to get back to the principle of fiscal responsibility here. And that was the easiest and largest pile of money that's sitting there for us to be able to pay for this immediate obligation.
Meanwhile, in the Senate, both Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell have pushed a package that ties Israel funding to obligations to Ukraine. The National Security Council coordinator for strategic communications reiterated today this House bill won't make it off the president's desk.
The president would veto an only Israel bill. I think that we've made that clear.
Meanwhile, in the Middle East, as many as 25 more Americans now in Egypt after being granted clearance for refuge amid Israel's escalating war against Hamas in Gaza. An estimated 400 Americans in touch with the State Department have been approved to depart the Palestinian territory, including their family members. That brings the estimated number of people now waiting for their turn to flee to about 1,000. The exodus of foreign nationals began yesterday, the result of a deal brokered by Qatar between Israel, Hamas, and Egypt in coordination with the U.S. And it comes as we learn the U.S. plans to press Israel for a pause in the war to allow for proper hostage negotiations and the distribution of aid. White House officials indicating that message will be conveyed by Secretary Antony Blinken, who just left, by the way, hours ago to board a plane to head to Israel. Here's what he had to say moments before departing.
We have to rise to that responsibility. And so we will be talking about concrete steps that can and should be taken to minimize harm to men, women, and children in Gaza. And this is something that the United States is committed to.
Blinken has plans tomorrow to meet with Israeli and Jordanian officials. Newly confirmed U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Jack Lew, he's set to travel with him for the first time when the stakes could not be higher. The death toll in Gaza, according to the Hamas-run health ministry, has surpassed 9,000, 3,600 of which are children. Palestinian fatalities are now surging as well in the West Bank as Israel and Hezbollah continue to exchange fire at the Lebanese border. Today, Israel reported 3 of its soldiers had been killed as part of the country's ground operations in Gaza, bringing the total to now 20. This as the head of the UN in Gaza says fuel supplies on the Strip are completely depleted, meaning it will not be able to supply hospitals nor move its trucks to provide humanitarian assistance. Israel continues to block fuel over concerns Hamas will confiscate it. Israel officials saying Hamas has 200,000 gallons of diesel in storage that they could be sharing with those in need. Experts say the exact amount of fuel the group has is impossible to know. Meanwhile, Hamas still holds more than 200 hostages captive. The National Desk's Atra El-Nashar has the latest on the efforts to gain their release.
Around the world, families of hostages held by Hamas will soon mark 1 month since their loved ones were taken on October 7th.
We've been out there looking for any clues, for any sign of life.
Dory Roberts of Austin, Texas, has 4 family members who were taken hostage and a 5th who was killed. He says it's an hour-by-hour struggle.
Sometimes we see videos published by the Hamas of the hostages, and that gives us some hope that they're held in somewhat good conditions and taking care for their health and needs.
The front page of the UK publication The Sun showing faces of 32 children with the headline, "Bring them home." Ari Perliger, an expert on extremist groups, says Hamas is likely trying to keep the hostages alive.
I think they understand that these hostages are significant leverage for Hamas in its effort to maybe promote some kind of end to the hostilities.
Israel claims Hamas is using civilians as human shields. Perliger notes in the past, Israel prioritized hostage safety in operational decisions, but he says that changed after October 7th.
The Israelis are willing to continue to engage in a very extensive military operations, despite the fact that they know that that may risk some of the hostages. The Israelis truly believe that they are now in an existential struggle.
During a campaign reception in Minneapolis Wednesday night, President Biden was interrupted by an audience member. She said, as a rabbi, she needs him to call for a ceasefire. The president said, "I think we need a pause, and a pause means give time to get the prisoners out."
Now, the president also revealed that he was the one to convince Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on October 20th to pause the shelling so that those 2 American hostages could get out. But duplicating that really seems less and less plausible. It did earlier today when we saw Israeli ground troops start to advance on Gaza City, or northern Gaza, I should say. But now we are seeing this all-out air assault last for 20, 30 minutes earlier today, and I'm sure the ramifications of that will not be good for civilians.
And Atra, how is the White House at this point explaining the difference between a ceasefire and a humanitarian pause?
It's not just semantics. There are practical differences here. John Kirby of the National Security Council, who we often see in White House briefings, was saying that a ceasefire would be the total stoppage of fighting on both sides for the sake of reaching a truce, whereas these pauses, as they're calling them, he said, are temporary, localized, and focused on a specific goal. In this case, getting humanitarian aid into Gaza and getting civilians, hostages, hopefully out of Gaza.
All right, Atra Al-Nashar reporting for us in D.C. Thank you. Meantime, canceled classes for students at Cornell University. The university telling students not to report tomorrow, acknowledging the, quote, extraordinary stress the campus has been under after one of its students made an online post suggesting people should kill and harm the school's Jewish students. A junior at the university, 21-year-old Patrick Dye, has been arrested and federally charged in connection with those anti-Semitic threats. Rescue crews in Martin County, Kentucky, continue to search for a man trapped under tons of rubble. It's been 2 days since the coal preparation plant collapsed, and we learned just yesterday that another man had died. Officials say there has been no communication with the trapped man, and the search efforts are now entering a new plan to get information and to also get inside the rubble.
When we pick things off the pile, that's our primary search that we did yesterday. We're actually going to put the debris in a pile, assign a rescue group to it, do a secondary search on that to make sure that it doesn't have any clue of a last known location of the victim that we're actually looking for. So it's a very methodical process. It's a very slow process, but it's a process that has to take place in order to get down into the building, again, where that last known location was.
In Minnesota, a hearing is underway to determine if former President Trump can be blocked from appearing on the 2024 ballot there. Keep in mind, this follows a similar hearing happening in Colorado. Both cases revolve around the 14th Amendment's insurrection clause and Trump's actions on January 6th. Today, several Minnesota Supreme Court justices said it seemed like Congress, not states, should decide if a candidate is eligible. In Trump's New York fraud trial, meantime, his son Eric was questioned today about his knowledge of his father's financial statements. He tried to make a distinction between the financial statements central to the case and general financial records. Donald Trump posted on Truth Social that his sons were being, quote, persecuted in a political witch hunt. Eric Trump will continue testifying tomorrow. And former Memphis police officer Desmond Mills Jr., one of the 5 officers charged with the fatal beating of Tyree Nichols, pleaded guilty to the federal charges against him during a preliminary hearing today. He will now assist the prosecution against the others who have not changed their plea with the court. Sentencing for Mills Jr. won't be until next May, and the federal trial against the other officers is scheduled around the same time. The trial in state court has not yet been set. Alabama's Supreme Court, meantime, is allowing the state to use nitrogen gas for the first time ever to make another attempt to execute Kenneth Eugene Smith. Smith has remained on death row since the state unsuccessfully tried executing him by lethal injection last year. The court had to decide if it could move forward for a second try. Smith's lawyers petitioned the court, saying he should not be the country's test subject for this new execution method. Further lawsuits on the matter are expected. The new execution date has not been set yet by the governor of the state, KIV. In Las Vegas, 60-year-old Dwayne Keffy D. Davis pleaded not guilty in court. He is charged with coordinating the 1996 murder of rap icon Tupac Shakur. Prosecutors told the court they don't intend to seek the death penalty. He's being held without bail and is due back in court on Tuesday. Coming up, big city mayors took pride in welcoming migrants, but now things have changed. What they want from the federal government. Then states are receiving billions of dollars in opioid settlement money, but there's ongoing concern about how it's really being used. We're going to take an in-depth look at that. Plus, the surprising trend that's now happening at libraries as a result of book bans in schools. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Tonight, a change in tune from some mayors of the biggest cities in the country. Places like New York, Chicago, and Denver now faced with a large number of migrants and not enough resources to care for them. New York's mayor ended up skipping a meeting with White House officials today on the matter, but joined other mayors in making some very big requests from the government, as Christine Frizzell reports.
Their cities are simply overwhelmed. So a handful of Democratic mayors came to Washington to ask the White House and members of Congress for help.
We have borne the brunt of the responsibility here. That's not an equitable distribution of how government should cooperate.
Their request laid out in this letter, asking the White House to remove barriers to work authorization and for $5 billion, far more than the $1.4 billion President Biden asked Congress for.
What we want is the federal government to step out of the way of employers who want to hire individuals who are trying to get access to work and help get them access to work as expediently as possible.
New York City Mayor Eric Adams has been one of the most outspoken on the issue, as buses of 100,000 migrants have been sent to his city.
Headed to D.C.
Adams posted this video on the plane to D.C., but abruptly had to return to New York. The reality of life in his city prompting a major pivot in policy from this statement a little more than a year ago.
New York is one of the few states where you have right to shelter. One of the few. We're not like those who are sending people away during their time of needs.
The New York Post just shared this video of what it says are sex workers in Queens as a little girl and her mother walk by. City officials say most are Venezuelan migrants.
It is going to impact the foundation of the quality of life of our city. When you have individuals who can't work, can't provide for their families, have to turn to illegal activities to do so.
Cities like New York and Chicago are now taking a hard look at proposing changes to their sanctuary laws, which currently make it much more difficult to turn migrants away. Meanwhile, images pouring in of a new migrant caravan right now making its way across Mexico, headed toward the United States. In Washington, I'm Christine Frizzau.
Well, as New York Mayor Eric Adams returned to New York, instead of being with his fellow mayors in Washington, D.C., we learned that the FBI conducted a raid of the home of one of Adams' top fundraisers, Brianna Suggs, this morning. The Bureau has not indicated the target of the investigation or what may have been taken from the home. A lawyer for Mayor Adams said the mayor will comply with any inquiries as appropriate, and his campaign holds itself to, quote, the highest standards. Initial jobless claims, they are up again, according to government data out today. First-time applications last week rose 5,000 from the week before. They reflect how many people were laid off, and continuing claims filed by those who were already getting unemployment benefits. They are the highest since April, but the numbers are still generally below average. The U.S., meantime, is placing new sanctions on 130 companies and people from Turkey, China, and the United Arab Emirates to restrict Russia's access to supplies for the war in Ukraine. Treasury Secretary Yellen said Russia is dependent on people from other countries to resupply its military. This round of sanctions builds on thousands of penalties already imposed. And 1 in 10 middle and high school students use tobacco daily. That's according to new data from the government. Among high schoolers, current tobacco use dropped from 16.5% last year to less than 13% this year. But among the middle schoolers, this is alarming, the number increased from 4.5% to nearly 7%. A CDC official said their work is far from over. Toyota is recalling nearly 2 million RAV4 compact SUVs because of a fire risk. The company says model years 2013 to 2018 may be impacted. Some of the replacement batteries have the wrong dimensions, so they could become loose and ignite. Toyota says it's working to fix the problem at no cost to owners. More information is available on their website. Thousands of Uber and Lyft drivers, meantime, in New York may be eligible for significant back pay, all part of a settlement announced by the Attorney General there today. The rideshare companies will pay out $328 million for allegedly improperly charging drivers taxes and other fees when customers should have paid them. Drivers can file a claim to receive the money. As billions of dollars in opioid settlement money continues to flow to states across the country, Spotlight on America is continuing its in-depth look at transparency over how that money is being spent. Concerns over secrecy in Ohio went all the way up to the state Supreme Court. And now, as national investigative correspondent Angie Moreski tells us, a mother who lost her son to an opioid overdose wants a seat at the table and is calling for accountability.
There you go.
8-year-old Ava is the joy of her grandma Jackie Lewis's life.
Good job.
She's now raising the little girl, but spending so many precious moments together came at a very high cost.
It breaks my heart to watch her have to grow up without her daddy.
Jackie's son, Sean, lost his 20-year battle with opioid addiction 1 year ago. And now, as a family member who lost a loved one to the opioid epidemic, she wants her voice heard.
Did you have high hopes for this settlement money?
Absolutely, I did.
She believes a portion of the more than $1 billion Ohio has received should go to help families who've lost loved ones.
This would not exist for anyone if it wasn't for the people that have lost their lives already.
Ohio created a nonprofit corporation called the One Ohio Recovery Foundation to distribute more than half of the settlement money.
We left executive session at 1:28.
But when Jackie attended one of the first meetings, she says she got a rude awakening.
They did not acknowledge any of us. There was not an opportunity to speak. They closed the meeting and moved it to an executive session outside of that room on a different floor.
It never occurred to me that I wouldn't be allowed into the meeting.
Dennis Cushon, executive director of Harm Reduction Ohio, which works to help reduce overdose deaths, says he also was kept out of a meeting and was outraged.
The impacted population who we represent shouldn't have to fight to know what the government officials who control the board are doing.
After also being denied public records from the board, he fought back.
Our organization sued them and we won at the Ohio Supreme Court.
In a unanimous decision, the state Supreme Court rejected One Ohio's argument that it was not a public office and therefore not bound by the Public Records Act, calling the foundation the functional equivalent of a public office with a clear legal duty to provide access.
I want to welcome everybody to the meeting.
The foundation does now post its monthly meetings, minutes, and policies on its website.
They've had 50 secret committee meetings.
But Cushon says his transparency concerns continued because several committee meetings where important decisions were made were still closed.
What they're doing is they're spinning it to like they have a few select meetings that they have open and then they can boast about it.
In a stunning development this summer, just 1 month after the Ohio Supreme Court ruling, the state legislature passed a law that overrides the court's decision, shielding One Ohio from public scrutiny. Asked for reaction to the new law, One Ohio's spokesperson told Spotlight on America, One Ohio is arguably the most transparent nonprofit in the state of Ohio and will continue to operate that way.
What was your reaction when the state legislature did that?
I felt defeated, angry. Well, it makes me wonder what else is going on there, quite honestly.
Spotlight did request an interview with the new One Ohio executive director, but as of this recording, that has gone unanswered. For Spotlight on America, I'm Angie Moreski.
Angie, thank you. Coming up, school book bans may be backfiring. Just ahead, how library readership is changing in response. We have reporters all across the country in your neighborhoods covering the issues that matter most to you. We're taking the pulse of America.
School book bans backfiring. A study released this week by professors at George Mason University and Carnegie Mellon saw a 12% increase in banned books being rented at libraries where the restriction does not exist.
I think we'll see that people who want to read will always read. This may spark some interest in some readers who maybe haven't picked up a book in a long time.
According to the American Library Association, Virginia is second to only Texas in the country in number of books challenged to be banned in schools.
I've nurtured her entire life.
And I raised her great. I feel like we did a great job. I told my husband that before the shooting. I looked back after she graduated. I said, we did a good job, babe.
The families of those killed in the block party mass shooting in Baltimore in July are suing the city and state. 18-year-old Lilia Gonzalez was one of 2 people killed. Her mother, Crystal, says she has a mixed bag of emotions over the lawsuit. An after-action report revealed that police knew about the event days before it happened, but at one point told Crystal Gonzalez they did not. The Baltimore Police Commissioner has admitted mistakes were made.
Bryce.
And a heartwarming story from South Carolina. Yesterday, a mom surprised her son right after getting home from a 9-month deployment in Kuwait. Major Tracy Martin with the National Guard surprised her son Bryce during the school's Army JROTC event at a Richland school. What Bryce says he's looking forward to most is finally having a meal together with his mom. The simple things. Coming up, the Fab Four makes music again. We're going to take you inside how the Beatles released a brand new song 42 years after John Lennon died. A new song by the Beatles was released today called Now and Then. This new track using AI technology features all 4 voices we so love. The song included a demo by Lennon and new music recorded by living members Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr. A YouTube video of the making of the song has nearly 3 million views, exposing a whole new generation to the Fab Four, of course, that grabbed hearts and minds all those years ago, and we love to see it and hear it. That does it for this edition of the National Desk. Have a great night.